What are the effects of gratitude on human health, happiness? The effects of gratitude, meaning if a person can adopt a grateful orientation toward life. Remember, affirming goodness and recognizing the sources of this goodness. Does that matter? Does that have any impact on the sorts of outcomes that psychologists who now have become associated with positive psychology are interested in, like optimal functioning and flourishing, well-being, life satisfaction, purpose in life? The list goes on about what it means to live a good life. Well, philosophers for millennia have talked about gratitude as a virtue that makes life better for self and others. So it would seem to me that if one could cultivate gratefulness, it should contribute to happiness, well-being, flourishing, all of these positive outcomes. That's what our research was designed to test. Is it possible to actually find evidence for this? And if so, how can we get more gratitude? And what might be some of the roadblocks or obstacles to feeling grateful? Are there limits to the effects of grateful living, grateful thinking? So that's the basic background rationale for why I've been doing what I've been doing for the last 11 years or so, conducting these random assignment, placebo-controlled experimental trials, which sounds very scientific, and it's not quite so, perhaps so grand as it sounds, but what we actually ask people to do are basically to keep gratitude journals, to create a sense of gratefulness by simply writing down, putting thoughts on paper, things that might go through our mind anyway as we go about our day. We think about how fortunate we are or how lucky that something happened, that someone was kind to us. We're out in nature and we see a beautiful sunset. We recognize the kindness of a person and so on. We see an opportunity in what used to be perhaps a difficult situation. Now we see the silver lining behind it. Anyway, we interpret a number of circumstances in a way in which it creates a sense of gratefulness. What happens when people write these down on a systematic basis, focusing their attention this way, becoming mindful of those things that they may have previously taken for granted? Now we ask them to take these as granted, as gifts. These are experiments. So in an experiment, you have a comparison group. So let's say half the people, you folks on this side of the room, would be asked to go home tonight and write down 5 things that happened today, or 5 things you reflected on that you felt a sense of gratefulness, or looking back on it, you now feel grateful in response to them. The other half of the experimental participants would be asked to do something very different. And that would be to focus on what went wrong today. Annoyances, irritations, complaints. You couldn't find a parking space. It was foggy. And, hassles. Basically, what we call the whining and complaining group. That would be the group on this side, right? Right and left. Okay. So, you do this on a regular basis. 5 things you write tonight, tomorrow night, the next night, so on and so forth, for a given period of time. You don't do it forever. Maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks is typically the amount of time we'll do in a study like this. And we vary it. Sometimes it's once a week for 10 weeks, or 3 times a week for 6 weeks. And whatever we do, though, basically that's the comparison. And then there's other comparison groups, control groups, that I don't have time to get into the specifics, but that's the main comparison. We want to see, does it make a difference if you have a grateful focus or not? You say, well, of course it would. If you're focusing on what's going right, you're going to be more upbeat, positive, optimistic, helpful. All those good things will go along with it. But we have this little thing in happiness called temperament and set point. And some people by nature are happier than others. So some of you folks on this room, your happiness set point is lower than others. Right? And so it's more difficult for you to conjure up a sense of joy on a regular basis or even gratefulness. So what happens is, what we find in our studies is that people are keeping this gratitude journal, but they're dispositionally unhappy. Right? So they're prone to focus on the annoyances and irritations. So they're trying to come up with stuff, and they can't think of anything. They're thinking, oh, I got to keep this stupid list. That's another, hassle. How silly this is, to keep a gratitude journal, how goofy it is, and so on. And just folks over here who are really happy by nature. Nothing bothers them. They're upbeat all the time. They take any situation and turn it into an opportunity for a good thing to happen. They don't care how long the lines are, how slow the cars are moving. They can listen to a book on tape. They can strike up a conversation with people in line, and so on. So we just didn't know what we were going to find from this relatively minor intervention. Well, first, let me just show you some example illustrations of hassles and blessings. We began our research, as a lot of research does on college campuses with students, and they have typical garden variety hassles related to roommates, parking issues, dirty roommates, and so on. And on the other hand, the blessings, we call these, just to make a contrast, you might call these gifts or favors or benefits or what have you, a variety of more uplifting, positive circumstances, which really have no limit. A lot of them are interpersonal interactions. Some are just being outside, spending time in nature. Some are very existential, like just being grateful to be alive, for instance. Look at the last one. Is that the one you're chuckling about? So you might think that'd be on the other list, right? My in-laws live 10 minutes away, but no, that's a good thing. It was for this person. So what we found, basically, to cut to the chase, is that, and over 1,000 people now we've studied from ages 8 to around 80 in these experiments, 3 categories of benefits: psychological, physical, and social. Psychologically, people report feeling higher activation, positive emotions. They feel more alert, alive, and awake, for instance, more joy, more pleasure. Physically, and those differences are roughly 25% increase over the people keeping the hassles group, the comparison group. So all of these are relative to the comparison group. In the domain of bodily functioning, we find that people who are keeping gratitude journals feel better about their health. They're bothered less by everyday aches and pains. They actually exercise more. They take better care of their health, right? And the differences here range from 10 to 30%. In terms of sleep, we find a 10% increase in sleep duration. When people are keeping the gratitude journals, they actually sleep 10% longer. And they wake up and they feel more refreshed. So it's not they're sleeping longer because they're depressed and they don't want to get up in the morning. They actually feel good when they wake up more refreshed. So the restorative active sleep is more efficient in people when they're keeping gratitude journals. And the third domain is social relationships. And this is one where we're really expected to find something, because after all, gratitude is in fact a social emotion. It's been referred to as a relationship strengthening emotion because it involves perceptions of being supported and affirmed by other people. They provide a benefit for us that changes the nature of the relationship now between the individuals. And in fact, when people are keeping these journals, they're more sensitive to situations in which they themselves can become helpful, outgoing, altruistic, pro-social, generous, compassionate, and so on. Less lonely, less isolated. So more positive social behaviors, fewer destructive social behaviors, keeping gratitude journals. So a variety of benefits in a variety of domains by keeping these journals that we've replicated now, starting with initially with college students, but then replicating with people with a chronic physical disease, with students, young individuals in the domain of health that talked about that. Oh, there's one study that found that blood pressure was substantially lower when people were keeping a gratitude journal. It was the first clinically significant biological outcome that was examined, that is substantially, I think by 10 to 15% reduced systolic blood pressure when people were keeping a gratitude journal, and reduced hostility, which you know is a major risk factor for coronary heart disease. We've done some research and continuing to do some more in the domain of childhood and educational settings, and collaborating with people who have expertise in studying children, developmental psychologists. And there's been very little research on gratitude in children. And so once that we found that classes were assigned to a gratitude journaling condition, actually showed benefits of gratitude journaling, educational benefits, some mental health ones. They became more satisfied with their lives, more satisfied with the educational environment, their teachers, mom, yes, the parents, and living situation, home residency, and so on. But actually some educational outcomes as well. We found that when kids, this was 6th and 7th graders, actually their grade point average increased over the course of an academic year when they were gratitude journaling. Even the gratitude journaling didn't last that long. It lasted for 3 weeks. But there was a slight improvement in their grade point average. So educational outcomes, school engagement, we found benefits for journaling in children. Okay, so that's a brief survey of some of the findings.